Thanks for getting onto the latest VOLTTRON office hours. Jaime Kolln is got a slide deck prepared to talk about ESIs, and then we'll open it up for discussion around this topic. Picking the right way to interact with utilities and other systems is a important part of developing out the platform. So I'm excited for Jaime to give this presentation, especially considering he's on vacation. So thanks a lot, Jaime. And with that, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, sounds good. Bear with me a second, folks. As Jeremy said, I'm on vacation. Couldn't get early check-in, so I'm sitting in my truck looking out of the beautiful Oregon coast, dreaming about being back in VOLTTRON in my office, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to talk to you guys about this energy services interface today. Let me know, please, if you have some questions, feel free to interrupt. I am on a mobile device, so if I start to break up and need to repeat something again, please stop me and let me know. Jeremy's been gracious enough to give me this office hours in the next 5 or 6 to talk about this topic because it's so big. But I'm going to try and keep this down to the interesting parts for you guys. There is going to be some background here. It's a fairly abstract concept that still hasn't come to fruition fully. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about the concept, a little bit about the work that we're doing that's going to lead to an actual interface, and then some about the things that directly impact you guys working with standards like IEEE 2030.5 and OpenADR. Sound good? Okay. So let's start just by giving you guys a high-level overview of the, sorry, just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything here. Give you guys a high-level overview of this newly distributed architecture we're dealing with in the electrical grid. And you guys have probably seen this before. This is from the NIST Smart Grid Framework. What I want you guys to pay attention to is that the electrical flows aren't changing too dramatically. We do have bidirectional flows, but what's really dynamic and new and exciting about the electrical grid is these blue lines, these communication paths. And that allows a lot more interaction, resilience potential, and opportunities for folks to make money by providing grid services. But there is a lot of coordination involved, and I think that's what you guys will be most interested in, is how do we develop these things and how do we work them together? So that was the high level. This is actually a little bit more detailed and shows you how many communication paths there are in between all of these entities. And one of the problems we have is that there's so many standards. You know, we got 2030.5, DNP3, IEC 61850. Just depending where you are in the grid and who you're communicating with will dramatically impact the number and paths that you have to communicate with systems, and also increases the coordination between different partners and entities on this grid that are all interacting. So the challenge here is that we need to scale these DERs at the level of millions, not just a few or a handful. And these service providers don't really have a way to coordinate in a plug and play fashion. And you guys all are computer folks. The idea would be this is like a printer. You plug in your DER, it registers on the system, and then you are able to access the capabilities of that DER. Right now, that takes a lot of custom engineering. And there's a lot of non-standard practices and business levels too, which cause these administrative burdens and these coordination issues now that we're adding aggregators and parties like Nest and these folks that aren't even necessarily in the aggregation business, but they control the path to communicate to their equipment. Most of this stuff now is done by direct load control. So the idea of an energy service interface is to get away from some of those things that are custom for each implementation, so we can have better data exchange while maintaining customer privacy. So this is the first slide about the ESI. What I'd like you guys to take away from this is that this is not a device. It shows this ESI bubble in here on the side of the facility management function. There's kind of a break. The idea is that the ESI is really this boundary condition between the grid or other party that's the grid manager, say, or the asset manager, and the DER facility management function. And all of our DERs have the primary purpose of serving the owner of the DER first. And then there's opportunities to provide grid services and do these other things, but that's all secondary. So with this concept of putting this boundary condition between the facility management function and the grid interested party, we're able to sorry about that. We're able to develop some basic definition of the information that can be exchanged or that is needed to be exchanged, rather than giving away too much, things like customer identities and stuff like that, what assets are running when, those types of things that you get from direct load control. So to scale these DERs effectively, we need plug and play operation. We need to understand what the capabilities of the DER, auto discovery, so we know when actors enter or leave the system, particularly things like EVs where they're very dynamic. We need to know how they are interacting with the electrical grid. And the biggest thing here is a service-oriented architecture. So rather than controlling a device, we're giving a request for a service to a service provider, and then they determine how they provide that service. We have to have some, sorry about that. We have to have some understanding and common definitions in order to get this thing off the ground. And the big thing is with grid services, because different parties within the electrical grid, from transmission to distribution operation, they have their own terminology and their own objectives that they're trying to meet. So one of the goals of this project is to define grid services in a way that's common, so that when you're dealing with folks on other jurisdictions or have other business objectives, aggregators, et cetera, that we're all speaking the same language and talking about the same services. And right now we have things like regulation. Regulation can be frequency and it can be voltage, and it means different things at different levels. Sometimes it's injecting real and reactive power. Other times it's only real power. So there's a very common one that's misunderstood often. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ESI, and then I want to get into some standards. So I'll breeze through a couple of these. This ESI is this interface boundary. So the DER facility is really important. We're staying away from the functionality of the facility, because that's partially up to the people that are paying some of you guys to manage their facilities for them. We're also staying away from grid operations, because those guys have methods to deal with their business objectives and grid objectives. This ESI really focuses on the interface and on the rules really around this interface. So now we're talking about, rather than having a box, a gateway, whatever you want to call it, we're talking about abstracting this away from a set of rules that define what interactions need to occur and what information has to be transmitted across the interface. So if we think about this as a set of rules, it helps to abstract this thing that people keep wanting to put a box in the way and control everything. The ESI doesn't really have that intelligence. It's really just essentially an information model and a methodology or a framework. Okay. So the ESI, I'm gonna try and breeze through these heavy wordy ones, because I don't like to read these slides, but you guys can have this deck when I'm all done and have it for review. The real big thing here is that we're defining what the services are, how to qualify and register a device to provide a service, and then how to validate that that service was provided, which then leads to compensation for providing that service. So we're developing this functional specification for this abstract thing. But it's really important to keep in mind this functional specification isn't technical. And when I started on this project, I kept wanting to put information models and map things, and let's figure out how these communication protocols handle stuff. It's not really this is a specification, but it's really like a profile implementation guide. So what would you take to CSIP, or sorry, to IEEE 2030.5 or OpenADR? What would you take them to give them a guidebook to develop an ESI specification? And I don't know if any of you have dealt with CSIP, but CSIP is this Common Smart Inverter Profile. Really, it's the only developed profile for 2030.5, and 2030.5 can handle everything from water and gas to, of course, electricity and energy products. But with only one profile, we really need help, because we got to get this energy service, other devices out there to be able to provide energy services. So we can do something like generalize a specification to provide for any device to provide services. Then we have a path forward to developing one profile. They take a long time to develop and get it out there to be used, so we have interoperability across our system. Okay. These ones are really going to go fast through. Common grid service definitions, I explained to you the idea of this is so that we're all talking the same language. So we've gone through and done a review of existing grid services. Part of this was done in GMLC 121. There is a grid services master list out there. Exceptional document, tells you all about the different areas and the different services and tries to generalize them for the entire country, potentially the world. SEPA ESI task force has also developed a list of common grid services. And NREL, this one on the left, is actually really useful because it's a lot of this is about timescale. How fast can we respond with our resources? So we took all of the grid services, did a pretty, I wouldn't say comprehensive, but a pretty thorough review of the different entities out there, PJM and NERC and FERC, and then local utilities and a lot of California stuff, some Hawaii stuff. We tried to come up with this list. You'll see this grid objective on the first column and grid services on the second column. And what we tried to do is abstract these things from the grid objective and the service name that gets used, and base these things off the performance capabilities required of the devices or equipment. So what we've got here is a set of really 6 primary grid services. So what we've come up with here is this automated response service at the top, which gives us an option for those things that we need to have that are like we preset boundary conditions and such, and the system can respond automatically. That happens quite a bit with frequency control. Frequency regulation is the next one. It doesn't quite need that same response capability, so it doesn't necessarily have to be automated, but it does need a response time in the seconds range. So you have to bring things up pretty quickly, and you have to be able to respond to signals. Operating reserves, those are really just pre-scheduling a device to be, or a resource to be available. Energy schedule service, which handles like demand response programs, anything that really requires real power to be scheduled at some point. And that's shed, that's adding load or reducing load. You could do either. So you could bring your vehicles up to charge before 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you hit peak. Emergency services, which are things like black start and voltage services. This evolves. So, I wouldn't necessarily read into these too much, but you get the idea. We're really trying to whittle these things down to their general performance characteristics rather than talking about objectives. In the end, the electrical grid relies on power and managing frequency and voltage. And so we have to deliver power at the same time we have to maintain these system levels. And really that's kind of what we're getting at, is how do we take these different services that are provided, break them down in a way that we can communicate and understand them amongst entities. So just to give you an idea of this energy schedule service, which is the most common service out there, it'll actually, this would be something you could support with a real-time market, a day-ahead market, a capacity dispatch, demand response programs, congestion management. Really, if you think about most of your services, almost all of them end up relating to energy scheduling. So keep that in mind when you guys are building these systems. If you can limit your data set, the information you need to communicate, you're basically maintaining customer privacy at the same time reducing your payloads, and we just need to make sure we understand what we're providing. Okay, now we're getting into the stuff that I think you guys will be interested in. This is the Interoperability Context Setting Framework. Gridwise Architecture Council developed this quite a few years back now, but interoperability is essentially built off of that framework. So we have all these categories. We've developed these sets of criteria for each of those categories: operation and performance, configuration and evolution, and so on. These criteria are basically, where an interface is used to conduct business, it complies with the technical, economic, and regulatory policies. So these are very abstract statements that you have to kind of determine what they mean, and they really apply to each standard differently. So we need to figure out how we build an interface that can, using some of these criteria to build out the specification, how do we have an interface that then can be adapted for each standard as they see fit? And can they provide these certain characteristics or capabilities that we need of the ESI? So going through this, what this looks like is we have these life cycle categories, and we go through and break down registration, qualification, scheduling, operation, measure and verify, settle. Typically, when one of these categories occurs, like registration and qualify, and we do an evaluation and we say, what do we need to register and qualify? Well, we need a facility ID. We need to know some power capabilities. We need to know some response times. We need to know some of these things. So we put together these kind of ideas of what we need. And we go through the criteria list here that you'll see on the right, those criteria that I just showed you previously. We break those down into each life cycle phase. And what we've discovered is that most of these criteria, once they've applied, they really continue to apply throughout the process. So as we register and qualify a device and we get a unique ID and we register for a certain grid service that we're going to provide, now we've gone ahead and broken these down to these more functional related aspects to each criteria. And once we develop those things, we need those IDs throughout the whole process. We need IDs to schedule, we need IDs to operate, we need IDs to settle and reconcile. So these things, once they're discovered, we've decided that they kind of just carry through this whole life cycle process. So it's what do we need at that life cycle, and then how does it affect the future life cycles, the future stages? So we've broken down these IMM criteria. We look at something like this criteria 8. And I'm sorry you can't see the top because of the screen here, but essentially it's resource discovery methods. Oh, I guess it says it right here. Resource discovery methods for assisting with identification and integration between actors are supported. And then it gives some examples of the information. So that's the criteria. We come up with an interpretation and say this is interpreted to us to mean a list of DER facility performance requirements that's supported by the service requester. The list can be accessed by a potential service provider with knowledge of the discovery service. And then we've come up down below, we make some assumptions. We stay out of the DER facility functions. Oops. We stay out of DER facility functions. We stay out of the power grid operations. We aren't interested in that. We're really only interested in what needs to be communicated across the interface. So we've got those out of scope. And we've listed some information that we think is crucial, the minimum set of information we think is crucial. And this is, again, a draft. So, any feedback you guys have, I'm happy to hear it. But at the same time, we're still thinking about it. So I may just ignore you until we're further down the road. We have this information set that we think is imperative to this particular criteria. And we go through this list for about 25 criteria and develop these characteristics that we think are crucial. And then we go on to these standards. And we figure out how are those standards how do they implement these things already? So we've gotten our basic understanding of grid services. We've got a basic understanding of what our information needs to be transmitted. Now we have to go to a standard development organization or a group, a subject matter expert group. We have to figure out how they implement all these things. You guys have dealt with standards, so each standard does it a little different. So we are working on 2030.5 right now. We go through the same criteria, so I'm using the same example, and we've got these specific requirements that we've come up with on the left, and then we just go through the standard and so they figure out if this is how they do it in the standard. And we're guessing right now this is us going through the spec, not being implementers or integrators. So if you guys, again, have feedback or understand these standards really well, especially if you've done implementations with them, love to hear your feedback on this and maybe even get you involved in the future. But this gives you an idea of what we're working for. If we can figure out what 2030.5 does, then take us to the subject matter experts. That's going to help us to encourage them to build a ESI. All right, so I wanted to get that stuff out of the way. I think the most important part about all this is hearing how you guys think this could benefit you, and also how you can possibly support, maybe offer guidance, feedback if you'd like to review documents. I'm definitely interested in folks that would like to review. Any sort of feedback is beneficial.
Thanks, Jamie.
Okay, you able to hear me okay? I didn't break up too bad?
No, that was perfect.
Good.
So I just had a quick question. So how do things like OpenADR and so there's a lot of existing options. Is 2030.5 the closest to this, or I guess what can you speak to that?
So the information models in 2030.5 are there is a lot of data and there's a lot of information and it's really versatile. So that's why we feel like and it's an energy standard originally, right? It's evolved beyond that, but it is an energy standard for how do we communicate with smart devices. So 2030.5 is the best equipped, we think, so far to handle the ESI. OpenADR has a cruder information model, but there is a Oasis Energy Interop, which takes that OpenADR standard and tries to, basically enhance it and give us some of the capabilities we're looking for. I mentioned SEPA earlier. SEPA has been supporting this work with PNNL for quite a while. And a couple of years back, we had the plug and play challenge. And one of the contestants in that plug and play challenge, which was basically an ESI demonstration, did use Energy Interop and is still using Energy Interop to build their platform. That's Raymond Kaiser. I think you've worked with him, Jeremy.
Oh, yep. Okay.
There's some thought about the information models being applied to DNP3. I know we've talked about that a little bit. So there's the MESA DER specification.
Right.
So that could be potentially another one. The thing is that doesn't usually get used behind the meter. 2030.5 has the security and such that crosses that boundary.
Okay. Oh, that's a good distinction. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, this is Ben from Slipstream. I was kind of curious to ask, is your target devices out there that you'd be looking to handle, are they mostly HVAC systems or battery systems, or could they be like something that a contractor would build, like a customized, like a HVAC system, for example, is something that's like designed, that totally customized in the BACnet system?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first thought is there is no specific device we're trying to do anything with. And that's really the goal of the ESI, is that we abstract the device from the capabilities. So if it's a battery, it can provide reactive power. And if it's a water heater, it can't do anything with reactive power, right? And so that capability is defined, but the device itself is not. It could be a battery system that can't provide reactive power as far as we know, right? So the idea is to be completely device agnostic, specifying only things like energy capacity and availability, things like that.
Like, at least in my experience, which is very limited with open automated demand response, it's been like kind of a challenge to the point where it almost seems like it's a little bit too complicated. And like, as far as like what we've been using VOLTTRON for, like, so these building automation systems running in buildings can be completely unique, where each building is completely unique. Each HVAC system is completely unique. So like finding some way to communicate a signal to a building, like the challenges on the building side, that we're running into is all these different HVAC systems, all of their different quirks, and trying to find something like very simple on the signal delivery has been like very challenging.
Yeah, and with VOLTTRON, you're helping to build out the agents that will be used for the entire ecosystem, I would hope, because we should all be feeding back to VOLTTRON as much as possible. But the idea isn't that is the facility, right? So you have these different loads. Oops, sorry about this. A weird mouse situation for me. I'm used to having a real mouse, but this DER facility operations all happen like this facility management function. That could be your control agent in the VOLTTRON platform. You have all your sub agents that handle your responsive loads, your distributed generation, perhaps communicate with your meter, maybe not, depends. Then the ESI would just be really the information model that you applied for grid communications, not for your facility communications, but for your grid side communications. Now, the facility management function, we've done this, we've had these conversations before, like, it's a facility though. It sounds like it's a bunch of different things, but it could be one device. It's just the functionality is in a layer above the device, right? It's not a direct control thing. It's a how do we do it? That's our decision, but this is what they need. So if we charge our EV now and discharge it later, that's one option. If we just lower our HVAC and lower our water heater, that's another option, but that's not within our scope, right? That's the facility operations, which are unique, just like you said.
Some like feedback too, like we do some work with the GSA, and they seem to not like message bus communications, like Rabbit MQ or any like VOLTTRON Central has been kind of an issue.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of learning like a little bit of this stuff on the fly too. Like It is 2030.5. I think that supports like MQTT. I was just kind of curious, like from like a standpoint, like would a lot of this stuff just be like REST API calls to the cloud or like some kind of message bus?
So
Can you
2030.5 uses RESTful. So that's the first thing. As far as the implementation methods go, again, we're trying to be as abstract as possible. So we won't really talk too much about how they do things or define how they do things. We're just going to define the information that is the minimal data set, right? How do we maintain a boundary between grid operations and facility operations, and give both parties an opportunity to benefit from each other?
Got it. Cool.
But as far as the actual implementation goes, one of the benefits I see of this platform being able to communicate with you guys is that you guys are already implementing this stuff. And so if you see on a standard that this is a gap, I'd love to hear that in an email, because you just saved me one of those gap analysis projects that I had to do with that interoperability maturity model. So any of that stuff you guys have is great. But again, we're trying to find out how they do it, not necessarily tell them how to do it until we develop an ecosystem that then says, this is what we're going to put together. That's how CSIP happened, right? It was a bunch of interested folks in California that thought, hey, we need to figure out these inverter controls, because holy cow, this is going to be regulated and mandated, and we don't know how to communicate with them. And so they all got together and had a, 4-year powwow about it. And then develop this inverter implementation profile. So this is phase one. So those next steps are really moving to that SDO level and talking to those subject matter experts and getting a feel for how we're going to go about the final steps, which are really in developing those profiles for the general standards. And then once they have those, we can support others in building out those platforms. I've been harassing Jeremy and Craig and a few others, though, by the way, to get this 2030.5 agent up, so that we have something we can play with. So there definitely is an opportunity here for demonstrations.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, I guess what would be any next steps for this community or anyone who wants to get involved?
So I would like to send you guys some of our specification work to review. So we have a requirements document that's out first, and just it's a very high level. These are some general topics that will need to be covered in depth in a specification. And then we have a specification document that's going to be out. That'll be a little while, but I'd love to send those over to you guys for some review. I'd love the opportunity to present to you guys and get some feedback as we go along. And I know right now it's very conceptual and high level, but as we start digging into these information models and these implementations, definitely your guys' experience is invaluable.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
In the future, I see definite partnerships, especially with some of the folks in your community that are building these facility management, well, let's just say what we call them, facility management functions. For those of you that are doing that, this is a great opportunity for us to see, that boundary condition, and if you guys could apply something like that to maintain privacy, or perhaps you already are and we're just behind the game. That would be disappointing.
Okay.
Has anybody done anything like this that you are aware of? Kind of these rules of privacy for energy services?
I'm not familiar with any of that. Anybody else on the call?
Okay. All right, well, good. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Let you have your meeting back.
Any other?
You guys all have you can have my email, I'll put it in the chat. And if you have any questions or want to have another meeting about it, or just want to be made sure you're put on the list of folks that are getting updates from our project, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. And Jamie, you fine with me sending these slides out to the mailing list? Okay,
yep.
Cool. So I'll do that. And then if anybody wants to follow up, then we can bring Jamie back or have a special call just around this topic. All right.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy, for the opportunity, and thanks everybody for your attention.
Yeah, thank you for taking time out of your vacation to present that. Go enjoy the beach while you wait for your hotel room to be open.
Why would I do that when I've got this great VOLTTRON meeting?
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you. So that was the only item on the agenda. Are there any other topics people wanted to bring up or discuss? And if not, then we can call this meeting early.
Wow, I bored everybody to death with all this abstract conversation.
Now they're all just thinking. So all right. Well, thanks everybody. If you have any topics you'd like to see in the future office hours, just let us know. Or if you have anything that you'd like to present yourself, always happy for presentations of work. And with that, well, thanks everybody for getting on. Bye.
Thank you.